Hi, I'm Betsy HERSHBERG of Studio B Knits. I'm a lifelong knitter, and I use the medium of knitting to create highly textural, sculptural jewelry. As part of this first CraftBoston holiday online, I've been asked to give a demonstration of how I make my bead knitted beads. It's one of my favorite jewelry components, and you'll see quite a few of them in the pieces I have in my CraftBoston online retail space. But first, I'd like to give you a short tour of my studio. So, come with me. Welcome to my workroom. It's not a very large space and it is jam-packed with lots of stuff, but let's just take a quick look around, see what's here, and then I'll come back and give you a little more detail about what you're looking at. What you're looking at on this door are my UBOs, my unidentified beaded objects. They are actually the swatches I create when testing out ideas. Not all of them end up as a basis for a finished piece, but I save them because I learned something from every effort. Sometimes just what not to do. So much fiber, there's no way I could keep all of it in my workroom. But I do keep most of the fibers that I use for my jewelry making up here. So let me show you just a few. In these drawers are some very colorful viscose fiber that works great for jewelry. It has that kind of sheen that I love and that really says jewelry to me. And if you want to talk about sheen, then we have lots of sparkly fibers down here. I also love working with variegated fibers. They give me ideas for color combinations that I might not have come up with on my own. That's a thick one, and here's a thinner one. And one of my all-time favorite fibers is silk. It comes in lots of different forms. This is raw silk that comes on cones. Some more fiber hiding over here in drawers and baskets. And then back to the silk. This could be my favorite. This is a silk thread made by Kreinik, one of my favorite companies. It comes in about 120 different colorways at least. It's just an inspiration and a pleasure to work with. I'm thinking you may have noticed all of these cases as we did our first quick look-see around the workspace. And maybe you also guessed what I use them for. Yes, I have a lot of beads, and I like to organize them. A little OCD, but how else am I going to find what I need when I need it, and then also know what they are if I need to add to them to go out and buy more? So this is where they are, sorted by color, size number, and also shape of the bead. You'll also notice here part of my knitting library. I have tons more books in that other room where I store my yarn, but I am very visual and I get lots of inspiration, not just from knitting books, but from art books, books about nature, whatever I can lay my hands on. I just love to look and then translate what I see into what I make. And speaking of visual inspiration, on the closet door in the back corner of the workroom, I keep things that I take from magazines, pictures of jewelry or fashion, anything that really catches my eye. And catching your eye is a turn of phrase that I really appreciate. It suggests that if something draws your interest and you find yourself wanting to look at it for, say, more than 10 seconds, there's something about that imagery that pleases you, that interests you, or maybe repels you, who knows. But whatever it is, it may be a great place, a great jumping off place to start a new project, especially when you're looking for some additional creative juice. I also use this space to hang exhibitor badges. if only to remind myself that there are days ahead when we will be able to be together face to face once again. We can all look forward to that. And finally, my happy place, maybe the most important place in this room. It's the big red leather chair where I sit to work. I have a nice strong light that comes over my shoulder. I have needles. I have tools. I have all the things that I might wish to grab as I'm sitting in the chair doing my work. Once I'm settled in, I'll pick up my work tray, which has all the things I know that I need right away. Needles, yarn, scissors, beads, and maybe even most importantly, that white pad you see there where I write down everything that I do. There's no way I could remember all of the steps that I take when I'm creating many of these techniques, so I write everything down so I don't have to commit it to memory. So thanks for joining me for the tour. Now let's move on to the demonstration part of the demo. When I first settled on making knitted jewelry, my aim was to translate the components of traditional jewelry into knitted form. Things like links and chain and beads and closures. Now, closures didn't have to be knitted, but they could be, and links and chain had fairly obvious equivalents in knitted technique. But beads have volume, and knitting in its purest form creates two-dimensional fabric. So how to create a three-dimensional bead? And then I remembered, we do create two-dimensional fabric, but we use it to cover a three-dimensional form, the human body. We knit hats and dresses and sweaters and mittens. All I had to do was find an underlying form, a bead form, and make a sweater for that. Here's what happened. These are the wooden bead balls I started working with. They are already drilled through. They're very light in weight, and as you can see here, they're readily available in many different sizes and shapes, not just these round ones. And the technique I'm going to share works with almost any shape, sometimes with only a subtle variation required. I settled on two options for these first little bead sweaters, or wrappers, or covers if you will. The first started out as a piece of flat knitted fabric, the second as a tube. It'll be a lot easier for me to show you these by using large styrofoam balls and heavyweight yarn, rather than the little wooden balls and the fine threads that I use. Now imagine that this styrofoam ball is drilled through the center of the ball, from point A, here on one side, to point B, here on the other, just like this little wooden bead. The line here on the outside represents the passageway through the bead. Let's call it the axis of the bead. We need to keep that passageway open, keep it clear through the bead, so that the completed bead can be strung as part of a finished necklace or even a bracelet. Here's a piece of flat knitted fabric that I can use to cover my round bead. In order to leave the passageway through the bead open, I need to wrap this cover with the axis of the bead in a horizontal position. I bring the bottom up to meet the top, and then I'll look to graft the two together to create a seamless join, which will look something like this. The white yarn represents the graft. And as you can see, the holes at either end remain visible and accessible. This is a tubular cover, shown as a work in progress. It's knit in the round on double-pointed needles. Once it's completed, you would slide the bead inside the tube, maintaining that axis in a vertical position. Once the bead is inside the wrapper, it looks something like this. And as you can see, the holes at both ends remain visible and accessible. Both of these options, the horizontal cover and the vertical cover, require that the openings around the holes be cinched be pulled together to cover the remainder of the visible bead, but still leaving the holes accessible. This is my favorite part. I've worked a running stitch around the edge and then horizontal, vertical. How cool is that? Now here are some real examples from finished work that can illustrate these two options. I think it's pretty easy to identify this bead as using the tubular or vertical cover. No beads on this one, just beautiful hand-painted silk. And down here for this focal bead, I've used the horizontal cover. Just knitted in hundreds of beautiful Japanese glass seed beads. All of the balls in this piece were made with the horizontal wrapping technique. I'm sharing it to illustrate that these bead covers can be designed to display different patterns using bead knitting techniques. 1 pattern, 2 patterns, 3 patterns. So how did I do that? There are many different ways to add beads into knitted fabric, way too many for me to demonstrate here. But the pieces I'm going to show you all use the same method. The covers are horizontal, the beads are pre-strung onto the yarn, and then added in when I'm knitting the fabric. But then how do you know how many beads you need? Well, first, you need to know the exact size of the piece of fabric you need to cover your chosen bead. And how do you know that? You knit a swatch. You use the same fiber, the same needles, and then take that piece of fabric and wrap it around your chosen bead, like this. This is a knitted swatch of tencel fiber, the one I've chosen to cover this bead. I wrap it around the bead, pinch the ends together, and then I'm able to count the number of stitches I need to fully surround the bead. By pinching down the top and the bottom, I can then also count the number of rows I need to make it all the way from the top to the bottom. The same technique can be used for a horizontal wrapper. Just turn the bead on its side, wrap again, and now you can count all the way around the number of rows you need to make it all the way around the bead. Pinch the sides, and you can count the number of stitches you need to make it all the way across. Once you've figured out how many stitches and rows you need to create the right size cover, you can chart it on graph paper, creating what I like to call a stitch palette on which to create your bead design. In this piece, these beads required 14 stitches, 40 rows, and 200 beads. The ones with the little hemispheres, circles, have 180 dark beads and 20 light beads. They're all graphed on the little stitch palette. So now when I sit down to knit, all I have to do is follow the chart. Each square represents a knitted stitch, and each of these circles represents a place where I'm going to put a knitted bead. So that's about all I have time for in this demo. I hope you enjoyed the short studio tour and that the demo gave you at least a little insight in how I use knitting and beads to create my jewelry. If you want to know more, I have a book. It's called BETSY Beads, Confessions of a Left Brain Knitter, and if you go to my website at www.studiobknits.com, you can learn more. In the meantime, thanks so much for participating in CraftBoston Holiday Online, and happy holidays to all. I'm Betsy HERSHBERG, and thanks for watching.